I was not informed about the dinner theater aspect of the performance tonight. This is a talk I've given on a few occasions in some nice places, but without food in front of my subjects. Follow that. So the thing that I'm working on, one way to sort of get excited about it is the thing that, well, I have a bag. It came with some shoes I bought, and I'm carrying some stuff in here which I'll show you in a little bit, but it's sort of hard to explain why I'm really interested in the stuff that I'm working on. You know, there's a sort of New York sensibility that you might run into as you travel the world, which wants to do everything better, faster, easier, and all that. And sometimes I will run into these types of people and I'll tell them that's what I'm working on, and they'll say, yes, absolutely, I'm very interested. But another way to explain it, to more humane, cultured, and sort of sophisticated people, is to show these nine dots to you. If you're American, any Americans here? If you're American, you might have seen it as a kid. Your aunt might have shown you these 9 dots, and she would have laughed a bit as you struggled to solve the puzzle. The puzzle of the 9 dots is you're supposed to connect them all with a line. And some of you have seen it and you have a vague recollection, maybe you know the answer, but it's the sort of thing that's a nice example of something that it's sort of hard to do, you know? I mean, if you could do everything better, you know, what would be the point? You just watch TV faster or something? But these 9 dots, you know, maybe these 9 dots and figuring them out is something like solving climate change, or figuring it out, having that insight, that moment of clarity is like figuring out some different approach on cancer or something like that. And in fact, in psychology, it's a reference puzzle that's been given for a very long time in a category of puzzles called insight problems. Since 1905, they started using it, and essentially it's a way to test whether you're doing the problem correctly. You show this puzzle to people, if they haven't seen it before, they never solve it. So I saw this puzzle. This is an interesting puzzle. So I pose it to you, and if you know about it, you're supposed to connect it without picking up your pencil. You might have some recollection. But my life and history is not about that. It's about cell phones. It seems weird. I started some companies starting around 2000. One of them, well, you know, you might have used a cell phone. In 2000, very few people used them really, and about half of Americans, adults, and now 110% of American adults use them. Virgin Mobile was a company I started. I started this company, Peak. So I'm sort of a gadget entrepreneur by background. And this new thing that I'm working on that Julian asked me to speak about that's in this bag, well, the first time I saw it, the first time I used it, the first time I put it together and made it go, I saw the light. That's my one-liner on it. I saw the light, which requires a little bit of backdrop, so I'm going to wind back to 1804, Volta, Aldini, Galvani. Volta's name you may know from voltage, Galvani from galvanic reaction and some other things. A bunch of the Italians, believe it or not, were really sort of important in the early days of electricity. They discovered it more or less, and they found some interesting effects with it. One of the really cool things that Aldini and Volta were associated with, they would do presentations with cadavers. They would make them dance using electricity. I don't know if that's like familiar, you learned about that in 3rd grade. That's an illustration. There's a paper by Aldini from the early 1800s where he found some ladies who were not very happy. They called it melancholia in Italy. And he made them happy. The Haagen-Dazs shows they're depressed. It's a bit of an anachronism. It's anachronistic. But he applied some current to their heads, electric current. And Mary Shelley actually was inspired by all this stuff. The Frankenstein novel is about electricity on a cadaver, more or less, that's been reassembled and so forth, and life comes out of it. And that's essentially the exciting thing about electricity in the early days, that it is the life force. It turns out electricity has these wonderful practical applications, you know, all around us, and it distracted people for a long time, and they didn't work on it. But in the 1960s, a movie was made documenting an interesting fact about electricity. You may have seen the one with Jack Nicholson, something about a cuckoo's nest. And so this thing that you know about shock therapy, actually it's a widely used treatment for serious problems. So you will privately think, oh yeah, there's that cousin I have who was treated this way. You don't normally talk about it too much. You have to have a big fucking problem to use this treatment, but it actually works and it's widely used. Shock therapy, that's an illustration. So depression is one of the applications. Epilepsy, there's a bunch of other sort of conditions that are treated that way. And electromagnetic waves, if you remember physics from your childhood, electromagnetic waves, right? Electromagnetic, they're actually related in a range of ways. And the stuff that's going on in your body, what the Italians discovered, well, the whole body's an electrochemical system. Electricity, magnetism, different types of different waves that you might send into the body, they seem to work. And people have been experimenting with a lot of different ways to insert experiences, stimulate experiences, change perception, target different areas of the brain and create different outcomes. The problem with all this stuff, though, is people never really well understood what was actually happening. This was the real issue. People thought, well, I guess there's this current going through the guy's body, and he's basically having a seizure. And a seizure normally is not a thing you want to have. But sort of like a television that you smack to fix the reception, it appears to work. So people measure the outcome, but not the method of action. And they think, well, it seems to work. And so essentially, the early stuff, the melancholia, and then here in the 60s and the 70s, the resurgence of the work around different types of stimulation for people with serious problems. It was a very interesting arc for electricity and magnetism of the body. I'll tell you that. I don't know if you're looking at that computer picture there, but very recently people have been working on sensors that pick up different patterns of stimulation in different areas of the brain, and they think, well, oh, you're looking at a cat. That's a memory of a cat. Maybe I'll project in an image of a cat, and now you see a cat. And certain early experimental work seems to insert memories. Like there's really cool stuff people seem to do operating at a distance, a lot of the times cracking the skull open and wiring things right into the brain. Okay, so now I've given you a little bit of history of how the brain works, okay? So I found myself sitting in this chair at a club in Long Island City. I don't know how often you go to Long Island City, but it's where I live. And my mobile phone ventures and things had gone well, and somebody had gotten me out of my latest entrepreneurial predicament, and I thought, well, it's the end of 2012, it's about a year and a bit ago, and I'm thinking, I should just, sit back, I should just think about what I should do next. I've done a lot of things, some of it's been fun, but making cheap cell phones is a bit dull. There's got to be better things to do in life. So I'm sitting in this chair, and I think back. Before I became a cell phone kind of person, I had actually been to graduate school. I had studied cognitive science, and I did a Ph.D. I was sort of a academic cognitive scientist. Learned about a lot of stuff, and one thing I learned about is this dude. So I read a magazine article, not a paper. Normally in science, you read papers. They're published in journals, whatever. And I read some weekend magazine profile of some Australian guy, highly suspicious, and he talks about a hat that you can put on your head that can turn ordinary people into savant-like creative artists. And this image is supposed to evoke all of that for you. Music, illustration. So I'm sitting in that chair, which I'm going to show it to you again. Looks extremely comfortable. And I'm thinking about this dude who I had read this paper about. And all those years ago, it was an article, not a paper, remember? And the article was just like, hey, people put on this hat and they become incredible artists. And I was a graduate student, so I went to all the professors, and it was at Stanford, and everyone's really important. And I'm like, hey, what do you think about this? And they say to me, it's complete bullshit, ignore it. Finish your fucking dissertation and get on with it. And I guess I'm the personality type to run across these things very frequently, because I would hear that a lot, and I thought, well, okay, whatever, I'll just move on, let me finish my thing. There's this guy talking to me about this mobile phones, I should work on the mobile phones. So I dropped it. All these years pass, I'm sitting in the chair, I look it back up again, and I find the paper he published based on the research that was in the article, right? So now it's, what is it, December 2012, January 2013, something like that, so about a year ago. And I find the paper, exciting moment. Some drawings. These are drawings pre the treatment. The top is you know, person A, the bottom is person B. Soak it in. After, you see the dog on the bottom left. That image has been in my mind for 13 years, since the first time it was part of the illustration. So there they are together. So when you do science, you need to like measure stuff, right? I don't know how you would quantify this, but showing you guys here over your meals, I don't know if it connects with you somehow, but the left-hand side is a pile of shit. It's like Lascaux, it's caveman, it's 2D, it's completely flat, it's horrible. On the right-hand side, like, there's magic there. It's something very different, especially that dog that's looking at you. But I also can sympathize with the guy who said it was nonsense and I should ignore it, right? The Australian guy wasn't so convincing. So I go back to my chair and I think about what should I do? Because I was making a list of the most amazing things I'd ever heard about, right? And so I made this list and I thought, well, let me explore these things. And I'm thinking, this one's really interesting. You know, everyone told me it was dumb. There's this paper about it. Let me look more into it. And so I email a list. The guy writes back to me. I invite him to come and talk at a little club I'm a member of, and he gives a talk. This is his talk. He talks about a bunch of stuff, and one of the things I'm going to point at. That thing is the thing that the Australian guy has spoken about. Talks about like a million things. We go for beers afterwards, and I'm like, that thing, what's the deal with that thing? And he tells me a little bit about the way the technique works and everything. And he says to me, well, you know, such and such, waves, stimulation, brain areas, targetings, and so forth. And well, I mean, it sounds amazing. I've made a bunch of cell phones, smartphones, stuff like that. And this thing he's talking about just really sounds simple. So I returned to my chair, and I started to do a bit more research in this chair. And I found another really cool thing. So I found this field that is developed around the Australian guy, and I started reading papers about it. Those of you who had not seen the dots before, like, did anyone try to solve it in the last 5 minutes? Probably not, you're busy with your garlic bread or something. So that's not the way to do it. And the thing about this 1904 puzzle that's been done in psychology is that it's a reference puzzle. The reason it's a reference puzzle is you give it to people who have not seen it, you give them 5 minutes, and you say, have you solved it? 0% solve it. 0. It's not so common that you have problems that nobody solves. That's what's so cool about the problem, 0. And the reason it's called an insight problem is because once you know the way, it's just like, fuck, why did I not know that? Jesus, it's completely obvious. And this actually, the think outside the box phrase, you know, comes from this. Memorize that and try it on your nieces and nephews. Okay, so what did I do? I made the thing. I made the thing described in the papers. I don't know if that's a natural next step in your daily life. So in this iPhone 5 box, I have this device. You see the thing I'm holding up in that photo there? This is it. This is that thing. I'll give you a few things not pictured there. A sponge from Seatown, cut to be 25 square millimeters. 9-volt battery, designed to deliver 1.5 amps, and a few other things. And what I saw when I stuck this thing on my head is I saw the light. I saw the light, which means I completely blinded myself and could not see anything. The entire room went completely white. Everything around me was imperceptible. And I asked the guy who was with me, did you see that? Because we were not using a 9-volt battery the first time we tried it, actually. We thought, well, it'll be easier. Let's just plug it into the wall. I mean, that way we know we have enough juice. So I wired basically the wall to my head and tried it to try to see what would happen. And, well, I saw the light, but I recovered. I recovered, I survived, I found that the product was safe, this thing, this technique. I was alive, I read a few more papers, and I found, well, it's completely obvious. You know, you send waves into your optic nerve, and you will just stimulate that area of the optic nerve. We fiddled with it, changed the targets, this and that. And then we created a visual cognition, the occipital cortex trial, where I played a video game, and this was the outcome. You notice that's a new record. And then we created a bigger trial with a dozen people who were just all eager volunteers, and we separated them into groups, and we zapped some and didn't zap others, and we made them do all this stuff. And the middle bar is the one to look at, because the one on the left is without anything. It's when they were practicing. In the middle, those are the guys that got the real stuff. On the right-hand side, they got fake stuff. That's the control group, and no one knew. It was a double-blinded trial. The middle group, you can tell. I mean, just sitting there, you can tell. And not only is it better, it's a standard deviation better. So if you search for your old probability homework. And so here's like the point of it all. Remember the cancer and the climate change and everything. What if you could help people solve those problems? What if there was a thing that you could do that in just a few minutes would change the way our best computer works? This is the thing that I've been working on.